Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. In this video I'm going to show you what is, in my opinion, the most overrated tip about getting faster in sim racing. If you find value in this video at any point, please use the like button. Lets me know that you enjoy it and also helps the channel grow. So let's get started. So I set an active reset point here on Spa in this section of the track. Starts from here, go through this corner all the way to the left and then the right hander, and I want you to follow the telemetry overlay and the delta bar. You'll see me now going a little slower on entry but matching mid-corner speed in the delta. But still, the whole corner or the whole section is slower. It falls apart. Now, when I'm talking about the corner's minimum speed or the apex speed, I'm specifically talking about this point in the corner when the car reaches its lowest speed. So for example, here I have 118 kilometers per hour, 113, 110, and this is the minimum speed in the corner. You're able to match it compared with pro drivers, but still you're losing time, even though you have the same minimum speed, and there's a reason for it. So what happened? The reference lap, which I was comparing to, had the brake shape more or less looking like this, while the attempt that I just done there had my braking looking more or less like this. We're braking earlier and harder, so we're losing time on corner entry, and we saw it, but then we're releasing a lot more aggressively in this part right here, and almost non-existent trail brake in the last stage. And because of this aggressive brake release and almost non-existent trail brake, we arrive in this point here with the same minimum speed. It's obvious if you rewatch it, because on entry the delta bar goes red. We're losing speed, but because we're releasing the brakes aggressively, the speed picks up and we end up with similar mid-corner speed, even higher. But this is slower than the reference lap. But now you can say, well, duh, he did not trail brake properly, that's why the rotation wasn't there, that's why he lost time on his way out. But that's not the case, because look what's gonna happen if I'm gonna be a little slower on corner entry and still I'm gonna trail brake so that I get the perfect line on my way out. We are even slower because what we did basically is keep the entry the same, still losing time in this part of the initial braking, but now just overemphasizing trail braking and adding a little bit of more braking force here in the trail so that we get more rotation. So essentially now we're losing time from entry to mid-corner, and the exit, even though it's good, it's not good enough to make time for the lap time lost in those two stages. And the overrated assumption or advice here is just match the minimum speed of the pro driver. Just match the minimum speed of the reference lap. But we did it at the beginning. We had the same minimum speed. It didn't work. Here's why. Because what we basically did in terms of speed graph was to initially go a little slower, then release the brake to make up for the minimum speed, but then the rotation is gone and losing time on the exits. What's happening here is that you're braking a bit harder a bit earlier and your brain will self-correct mid-corner. That's because deep down we all have a speed clock that can roughly know what that minimum speed should be in a corner. If you shave a little bit too much speed on initial braking, as you approach the turning point, your brain notices you're already slow enough, maybe even too slow, so you instinctively start easing off the brakes. The problem is that when you come off the brakes too soon, you remove the weight from the front tires right when you need it for rotation. So you're slowing down at a lower rate than the reference lap, and by the time you reach the minimum speed, your speed matches. But you've spent most of the time on corner entry well under the car's limit, with too little weight on the front tires to help it rotate effectively. The opposite scenario is also common. This time you're braking too little at first and your brain is self-correcting by adding more brake pressure deeper into the corner. At turn-in, you ideally want a smooth decreasing brake pressure, so the weight transfer is forward and stays stable. When you suddenly add more brake pressure mid-corner entry, the weight transfer to the front spikes. This sudden shift overloads the front tires and quickly unloads the rear tires. This unsettles the platform so you can't rotate as smoothly, and you're also increasing the risk of locking a tire or triggering the ABS. So how do you fix this? Well, first of all, you have to start by purposely loading laterally and longitudinally the car to the maximum of its ability. So for example, here on corner entry, your goal right now is to push as much load as you can on the front tires on that initial braking phase to keep the car at the limit. But as you're transitioning for this straight line braking to turning a little bit into the corner and committing to the corner, you want to keep the pressure high enough so that you're still loading the outside tire. So you see the car leans towards the left side, and you want to keep this car loaded up until your throttle reference or the apex point. You don't want to lose any lateral load up until that point. It's the same on under straight line braking. So in order to do this, you basically need more control in the brake release, and you also need proper references. What I mean by proper references is making sure you're not too far off the reference lap in terms of the braking point. You're not braking too early or too late. But let me give you an insight. You're not going to be able to replicate the exact braking point of a pro driver of a reference lap because the issue is in the brake release itself. So first of all, we must make sure that our throttle and braking references are kinda enough for us to work on the technique itself. Because if you're going to brake way too early or way too late, then we will just do the mistakes that we already talked about. But if your braking reference is quite close, then we can work on your brake release. So once again, it's very easy to match the minimum speed of a pro driver in a corner if you're releasing the brakes aggressively here, or if you are ramping up the brakes because you braked way too softly initially. In both cases, the problem is the brake modulation, and in most of the cases, it's the brake release. It's not the way that the drivers are applying more pressure after initial braking. Maybe for beginners, but for intermediate drivers, it's the other way around. Now, we can talk about it a lot, but to put it simply, in order to get better at releasing the brakes, you're almost looking for the minimum brake release that you can do in a corner. Because look, if I'm going to brake like this, brake hard initially, and then quickly releasing through trail braking, what are the odds that there were a little bit more grip available there and I was not using it? You won't know if you release that sharply. So you need to get better at almost dropping with 1%. You see here what I'm doing, just like that, very, very slowly, being able to have this kind of precision. And this kind of precision comes with practice, comes with you driving in a corner, still pushing for a high minimum speed in the corner. Don't get me wrong, this is not a wrong tip to have a good minimum speed in the corner, but it alone, it can just lead to a lot of problems. We saw them previously. We're still looking for that minimum speed that we're feeling instinctively, but we're trying in our way to the corner, in our way to the apex, to release as gradual as possible the brakes. And you might make the argument that, okay, if I'm going to brake this hard and I'm going to release very gradually, I will just be so slow, the car will understeer, I will trigger the ABS. And my answer to this will be, why don't you change the brake shape distribution? So instead of braking hard and releasing very gradually and basically arriving to a point where the car feels so slow because you released that gradually, you can just brake softer and hold it for longer. You can even brake earlier but softer, kinda like this. And you're still releasing gradually. Because there's this difference between the peaks of the red and the green shape, it's much more powerful here. We change the distribution of our brake into one that's more efficient for the corner. We can brake a bit earlier, tiny bit earlier, hold it for longer, but braking softer so that we can keep the front end tires loaded at all times while cornering. But even with all this theory and examples, when you're going to try to apply it, when you're going to try to have a smoother brake release, there's something else that will get in your way, and that's the pedals. With almost all the pedals, you're going to experience this phenomenon. And I want you to try this with me. Try to keep a constant pressure and just release very gradually. Look, this will happen. I'm hitting 88, and I'm now going to try to release very gradually. You see that drop? That will happen. And if I'm going to try again, maybe I can control it when I'm looking at the percentages, but if I'm not looking there to see my actual braking force, I might drop a little too quickly. Why is that? Well, these pedals have the tendency to trail brake on its own. It's because of the rubbers, it's because of the force. We're mostly setting these pedals by having the need to press harder into them. So the muscle can fatigue, the rubbers also heat up, they also age in time. And if you're running springs like I have, it's a little bit better, but you're still gonna be feeling the need to release more than you think you are. So you will not keep the car laterally loaded at all times because of this. But I found a way around it. I've tested it with my students in coaching session and in my courses, and the feedback that I've got was quite good. And I said to myself, okay, let's not gatekeep it. Let's share it with you as well. So because we have this tendency of braking hard and then dropping a bit quickly in our minds, when we're pushing the brakes, we have to think differently. And at first, you must do it on purpose before it became second nature. So I'm going to represent here how I'm actually feeling when I'm pushing the brakes. Keep in mind, I'm talking about how I'm feeling and what I'm trying to do in my mind, even before touching the brakes. So I want to be pressing the brakes hard initially. So we have a force going here up just like this. My hand is a little bit shaky, that's why it's not a straight line. But in my mind, it's like a straight line up. Now I'm arriving the threshold braking, so to speak. We're basically trying to draw a brake shape just like this, you see? But initially, I press the pedal hard. Then, in my mind, I'm not thinking about holding constant pressure, which is what you should be doing with GT cars. Instead, I'm thinking at holding and increasing the pressure as I go deeper into the corner, just by a little, like this. So in my mind, I'm not holding constant pressure, I'm adding a little bit more. And then I'm going into brake release by still trying to add a little bit more. So you see the difference around here is that I'm not thinking about the ideal brake shape. I'm trying to do something that's actually not ideal because I'm trying to compensate for the trail brake that happens in the pedal. So here, instead, ideally, you should keep constant pressure. And here on the brake release, you should go more smoothly, more gradually. Instead, you want to overemphasize a little bit more on the brakes. You can get to the other extreme and do the mistake, but more often than not, if your problem is that you don't keep the car laterally loaded at all times while going to the apex, this will fix it for you. You're basically tricking your brain by pressing harder as you get the peak and pressing harder as you release so that you keep that pressure and you don't let it waste. You don't let it get away from you, because that's going to happen with most of the pedals. And let me give you one more example why just hitting that minimum speed in a corner is super overrated as a tip, and it's just not enough. You have to look at other things as well. What happens if you're apexing a bit earlier in the corner? So let's say we have this corner, and let's say the ideal apex point will be around this part here. If you're going to apex earlier, let's say at this point, with the exact same minimum speed as a pro driver, but taking this apex, your car will just go wide. It will go here, outside the track. Or you will need to drop the throttle in order to bring the car back on the circuit. In both cases, you are hitting that minimum speed, but you're getting a worse exit. So as you can see, there are a lot of factors going on in a corner, and just judging by the minimum speed, it's not enough. If you're wondering why you were hitting some exact same minimum speed as pro drivers, but still lost in different phases of the corner, or you were wondering how you can't hit that perfect peak initial pressure, then I hope this video was helpful. If it was, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking around. I'm trying to bring as much value as you can to you guys. And these videos right here will also be similar. So if you enjoyed this, if you want to learn more, check them out. I'm Marian, and I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.